Torrington, Director of Windrush Foundation, and today we welcome Professor Hedi Mirza. Welcome, Hedi.
Thank you.
Okay, now just a little bit of your background in terms of Trinidad. You're a product of Trinidad in some respects. Go and tell us about that.
Well, I grew up in Trinidad, but I was actually born in Britain in 1958, giving my age away there. And so I am the first generation of the Windrush, the child of the first generation of the Windrush, should I say, and very proud of that heritage. But when I was just 5 years old, my father decided to go back to Trinidad. So I grew up till I was 16 in Trinidad.
In Trinidad?
Yeah, and then I came back to England at 16 in 1973.
So, so how was life in Trinidad, though, as a person born over here, going back?
Well,
or going to?
What was, you have to remember this, the times, this was just the post-colonial era where Trinidad was getting its independence and finding its footing in the world. And so, in 1962, Trinidad became independent. And my father got a job back home in the oil fields, because remember, BP was a very big company in Trinidad, and so he had an opportunity, whereas here he was a clerk in what was the GLC in those days. I remember him saying that he would sign off grants. In those days, you used to get grants for going to school or university, and that was his job, was to process that. But when he got an opportunity to work in back home, he said, "I'm going to take my children for a better life."
Okay.
Back in Trinidad.
So
A Windrush returnee.
But at least temporarily. Huh?
Yes.
That's right. So, but how was life like then in school and so on in Trinidad?
Well, it was, again, because my father worked for a colonial company like BP, there were many expats, and I went to a school in the company, and I found it extremely difficult. I've always struggled with that experience because it was largely white children in that school, in my primary school. And there was a lot of bullying and a lot of racist abuse. So my awareness of racism, I think, started from that very early time.
Yeah, even back home?
Yeah, back in Trinidad. And then I progressed on to secondary school, and I went to Naparima Girls. And it was a school that was founded by my grandmother, Teresa Hussein. So, and my grandfather, who was a minister in the Presbyterian Church. Again, the colonial era really shaped our experiences because they were all converted by missionaries. They had come as indentured laborers to the Caribbean, and in order to get education, they had to convert to Christianity.
That was
standard. Yes, that would have been the 1890s, the early part of the 20th century.
Indeed.
Yes. Yeah.
That's right. So that he remained a minister? Or
yes, he remained very much a minister, Presbyterian. I remember him, fire and brimstone.
Your granddad?
Yeah, my grandfather. Very strict.
So how did your father then? How did he cope with all that? Your dad?
My father, he had a very progressive, outward-looking way of coping, I think. And, well, in order for him to become educated, he had to partake in the system that existed out there, which was the monitorial system. So his education is that you are educated in the classroom, but then at the age of, even 10, 15, you become a teacher. So he actually developed his educational journey through through the church.
Okay.
Yeah.
And now he came to this country in 1950, is that?
December 1950, and it's so fascinating.
December, that's winter.
Yes, I know. And he talks about having a towel because they didn't know.
Towel?
He didn't have a proper coat, but he had a towel to keep him warm.
Wow, amazing. So how did he cope?
He always told me he was bald, and I used to say to him, you know, Daddy, you're bald. And he used to say, it's because I used to have hot showers to keep warm. So he said it made his hair drop out.
Oh, is that? Oh, dear me. Anyway,
Yeah.
so you returned to the UK then in the 70s.
Yes,
So
1973.
how was that?
That was a complete shock to my system, very much, because we moved back to the area of London where they knew, and I think this is also a pattern that you find.
What area was that? What area?
This is South London, in
Okay.
Tooting, and in Brixton. So we lived in Brixton Hill, Streatham Hill, when we came back. But I was born in Tooting, in South London, and I went to school in a nearby St Martin's in the Fields, which was in Tulse Hill. And the racism in the early 1970s
right.
was so overt, was so brutal. I remember when I started school, I did very well in Trinidad. You know, the schooling system there was so intense. You know, you got licks if you did not do well. And so, you know, and you're totally dedicated to your schooling. And so when I did the entrance test to get into the school, which was a local school, they said I cheated. I couldn't have done so well because I'm coming from Trinidad. And then they said, well, we will let her in to the school if she promises to learn to speak English proper.
Oh, I see. So they recognize the Trinidad accent.
I had a very strong accent. And you see, I have learned to speak in the white ways, which is, I don't know, a way of coping, a way of strategizing, but I've never lost my soul. But you have to work the system in order to get through the system, because remember, that was the time of Bernard Coad and his report about ESN. And actually in the school was implying that I was not intelligent enough.
Even though you passed that?
No, because they thought I cheated. They thought I could not possibly
But
have
then,
come from the Caribbean and be that good. That was an assumption. And my whole educational life has always been driving against those assumptions. As a woman, as a person of color, there are always those assumptions.
Indeed. So really then, so during the school life, how were things then? You know, at school, at college or whatever?
Well, at school, and again, in those days, you know, the capacity or the numbers of West Indian children, Asian children were not that high. That's something that we forget about now. We were
Especially
small
at
in
that
numbers.
school.
Yeah, even though it was in Brixton, the borders of Brixton and Tulse Hill, the numbers, we had 4 girls in our class. In my year, probably about 10 in the whole school. And so we formed a group, and we're still friends to this day.
Very good.
Yeah, that would be almost, 40 years ago. So we banded together, and I do remember there was a lot of far-right activity, and a lot of the girls in the school, the white girls, were actually, their parents belonged to the National Front. As a matter of course, they didn't even think, I guess it's like people saying, well, we vote for UKIP in those days. It's very interesting.
So they weren't ashamed of...
They weren't ashamed of it.
Yeah.
But we knew that this was really gross and really, overt. They would do things like throw peanuts at us in the corridors, make monkey sounds, tell us to go home, But doesn't that sound familiar? This is what's happening again.
Indeed, indeed.
You know, 40, 50, 60 years on, it's the same.
It's the same. So, well, let's call it college then, or let's call it high school. What did you specialize in then? What was your interest to move higher?
Well, from school, I went on to university. They told me that I would never get into university. And I just remember going up to the careers room and looking up all the different, because there was no internet in those days, and saying, I want to go to this university or that university. And I chose the University of East Anglia. And I did development studies, which is, some people think that means child development, but no, it means in those days, third world development. So it was about trying to understand the kind of brutality of colonialism and what it had done. But the most interesting thing was the moment in time. It was 1977, and Zimbabwe was becoming independent, and we had all the freedom fighters from South Africa, from Zimbabwe, and there was also the rise of the Islamic State in Iraq and Iran, and so there was this whole movement coming from anti-colonial, anti-Western sentiment was beginning to rise at that moment in time.
So these development studies then, did it work out to be a different subject like sociology or?
Yes, it was sociology, social policy, you know, we did geography, we did land use. You know, we had to go out and dig potatoes.
And you qualified in what year? What year did you qualify?
1980, yes.
1980,
yes,
right. So
yes.
having qualified sociology, so what are you going to do then? How are you going to, you know, change the world?
Well, that's why I did the course, because I wanted to change the world.
Okay.
I was angry.
Okay, so what did you do?
Yeah, well, I had a baby.
Oh, that was early.
Yeah, I was very young,
Okay.
but it was so interesting and exciting because I just felt like I could move mountains. And one of the things that really that I enjoyed the most in my course was learning about education. And so that's how I felt a natural inclination. Not only had my father worked through the monitorial system, but my grandmother was a Bible woman in the turn of the century.
Okay.
And she went around teaching, particularly women who were isolated in, you know, way in the bush, teaching them to read and write. And then I just knew that this is my own, I don't know, my own journey had to be about education.
Indeed. Because
you can change the world through knowledge. And so that was really set me on the path.
I tell you, Heidi, what we're going to do, we're going to get you back next week. And we're going to continue on that journey. We've had a part of that journey up to the 1980s.
Yes.
And surely we will want to know about after 1980 next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you.